All right. What's up, guys? So I'm just sitting up right now. But this morning I wanted to work on basically an issue that we have on Noticed, which is it's a little confusing if you're using Twilio, Slack, or Vonage right now, because we make an HTTP request to send your notification to those services, but we're not really validating that response at all. So what I would like to do is actually go and update the Twilio, Slack, and Vonage integrations to actually throw an exception whenever those messages don't go through successfully. So if there was a unauthorized response or something that wasn't a 200, I want to be able to raise like a delivery error or something. So this guy mentions that in his issue that I got this morning. And basically, it is, we can document it as well as we want, but you might be grabbing, the wrong account SID from Twilio or something. And so I want to make that easier for anybody using this gem. So that would definitely help me as well. And so what I think we should do is go through the code and go into our delivery method tests, because we don't have too thorough of tests for these yet. Right now we're using Mocha for Twilio just to make sure that the deliver method was called. We're not actually testing, that it actually sent a request or anything. So that's one of the things we need to get more thoroughly integrated on this at some point. But for now, that is fine, and it will do the trick. But basically, we want to be able to see that it raises an error with when HTTP request fails, something like that. So we want to basically implement a where did my YouTube window go? There we go. So yeah, we basically want to implement that. And I'm also thinking that we probably want that as a configurable thing too. So we make our HTTP request here, and we don't do anything with the response. We just make the request, and that's it. So we're going to want to save that response and then validate it. But I'm also wondering if we always want it to be successful, or if there are times when we don't care if it fails or not. There's a case where, you might have a user put in their credentials for Twilio or something, and it's an invalid credentials, or they put in the wrong account SID and missed a character or something. So we may want the ability to turn it off. We also might want like a logger version of it, so that we could say, rails.logger.debug or something like that, and send in the response, into the Rails logger. So there's quite a few different things we can do here, and I'm trying to figure out, what is the best approach for this. Like, the debugger is probably good, but we might want to do that if, for example, we could go and say debug is true in our options or something. So we could have it print out that entire response body. That could be an option. That wouldn't be a bad thing. We could also have like a debug is true, DSL method here that we could use and just have set on the delivery method. But I think the debug is true is probably not a bad thing here. I don't know that we'll need to really test that out too much as long as it works. But basically with this, we have access to our options, and we can say if debug, then we'll print out that response to the debugger. So this is going to give us a response, which is from the HTTP-RB gem. So HTTP-RB, this gem, probably my favorite HTTP request library in Ruby right now. It's also pretty fast. So it is right here in that list. Curb and these other ones are actually like integrations with the libcurl C library. So of course they're going to be really fast, but they're also going to have to compile C extensions to run. So yeah. So let me bump up the font size for you guys so you can see that a bit better. Okay, so we will get back a response like this. So let's try and see what happens when we make a request and just write out the response value to the Rails logger. Because what we probably want is more of like a toString or something when we're writing to the logger. We probably don't want to print out like the instance, because I think it gets truncated like that, and it's toString sort of thing, and that would probably not be super useful. But we definitely want the response code, and I don't know that we care too much about the headers, but we care about the response body and the response code. So maybe we're doing, 2 of these. Maybe we do a toString and we also write the response code or whatever it is. Possibly. Let's go to the wiki and we'll go to maybe response handling. Yeah, code, status, an object representing the status of the response. So status, this is nice. So this could be very useful for us to do our check if we want to raise an error if it fails. So let's see, we've got our body. Content type, cookies, flush, reads and discards the response body. Useful for persistent connections. Oh, that's cool. So I'm thinking that might be a good thing here. Now, another thing is that we could, right now we're integrating directly with the HTTP library for each of our delivery methods, and it might also be good for us to build a helper method that makes a request. Because right now, Vonage uses a post, Slack uses a post, and Twilio also uses post. So we could extract out that into, say, the base class, make a helper method that knows about the debug option, and then that way we don't have to implement that in each one of our classes here. So if we were to grab this and we go into base, we could add a method here called call it simply post if we wanted, and we could take and have like basic auth params in here if we wanted. It's going to be a little bit different chaining for some of these, because Slack takes a post and that's a post with no basic auth. So it's got JSON in this one. Slack has, I believe, JSON, but what was it? Twilio's got the form data that it sends in. So it expects you to send in not JSON but form data. So this, if we do this, it's going to be a little bit more complex. We would take, say, let me move those over. We would take the URL, and then we would have our options hash. something like this, and we would need to pull out the user and pass from that. So we could say like basic auth equals options dot delete basic auth to pull out these the user and pass here, and that could work. And we could say if basic auth, then we could have our request equals, say, HTTP basic auth and use basic auth account SID basic auth token in there. Otherwise, we could just use the HTTP library, and we know we'll be using request there, and we can call post, and then we'll want to pass in the options here. So that would take a post, and you would say example.com, and then you could have basic auth as user and pass, and then you could pass in either JSON or you could pass in form into this, and it should pass all of those correctly to the HTTP library. So that's kind of an approach we could use to extract that out and make it a little bit more reusable. But it's also going down a little bit of a tangent. So I think what I'm going to do for now is just kind of add this method as a, concept. We're going to go back to the Twilio stuff, and we're going to test this out and see if we can get it writing to the logger. And then we can use that if response.status.success. We can, we'll probably want an unless, and we'll want to raise some sort of argument error, or, we'll build our own custom error for that, but we'll be able to write, the response information out inside of the error there. So that would be kind of roughly what we're looking to achieve here. And we also may want this to only run, say, if there was an option for raise exception, or something like that. Raise exception maybe is true. Maybe on failure you could say exception, something like that. I don't know what we would call the option exactly, but it might be nice to have that exception being raised as a configurable thing. So we'll have to think about that. We could do maybe exception on failure is true. Not entirely sure, but we'll leave that for now. So let's see if we can write a quick example here. Now we have this dummy app. When you're writing a Rails engine or a plugin, you're going to generally have a dummy Rails app inside the test folder, and you'll load that as part of your tests. And so you can write, for example, notifications inside of there and access all of the models and things just like you're in a real Rails app. So this is nice, but we want to go into the log folder here and kind of watch the log folder and see if it's going to write those logs when we send our Twilio message here. So we'll turn on the debug as true, and we will say maybe Twilio example new deliver for user. This may throw an exception at what point? So it's gonna expect us to have credentials somewhere. So that might be where it would fail first. So let's try that out and see what happens. Test. Andrew asked about handling when someone replies stop to a message or an SMS. Either you need to build either Twilio will handle that itself, which I'm not sure, I can't remember, or you need to basically build user preferences into your app and then listen for that web hook from Twilio, because if they send a message back to you, you want to listen for that and then basically turn off their SMS notifications in your config, so that the notification knows not to deliver SMS to that user anymore. That's probably what you would want anyways, because you're going to want to handle maybe other words than just stop or whatever. I don't know if the SMS services actually do that stuff for you. I would imagine not, but they might. So let's go and just one thing I do a lot here is I just throw a bybug in my tests so I can run the code really easily. Rails test noticed delivery methods, or it's test delivery methods Twilio. Okay, cool. That's a neat thing if Twilio will do that for you. So let's open another folder. We'll tail the test dummy log develop. No, this would probably be the test environment. So let's do that. Let's run this. And okay, we get undefined method fetch for nil class. What that's going to do is look inside your Rails credentials for Twilio by default. So let's go and modify our example here. So we'll say the credentials option is Twilio creds, call a method called Twilio creds, account SID, and what is that, auth token, yep, and our phone number, and we'll just have an invalid phone number for that. Okay, so this should get us a little further into actually testing what we want to test in our logs here. So you get undefined method phone number for user. Yeah, so this is the recipient phone number, because right now generally, if you're sending a Twilio SMS to someone, the default is to send it to their phone number, so we kind of assume that you implement a phone number or something on their model or their object. So potentially you may need to override this format if you want to change the way that is set up, or you can just go into your model and define a phone number. So let's go into models user, define a phone number method, and this will just return 8675309. And that should get us further along. So we'll try this one more time. And there we go. It completed successfully. But yes, so this gave us a 404. And that is our code, our message, the requested resource account /a/messages was not found. more info, blah, blah, blah. So, to me, this looks pretty good. So we get the 404 message. We can just combine that in the same thing here. So what we can do is like response code, response. I don't know that we'll need to convert that to a string anymore, so let's try that one more time. We can get rid of our by bug in here because we know that it's like, you know, writing to those logs. Our test will pass because we didn't get any exceptions raised, but we should see in the logs 404 code status. Okay, so they're giving us the status there. In the JSON response, but that's probably just Twilio's formatting. It's not going to be the same for Vonage or Slack or anything. So we want the HTTP request message here, or status code. So we can also do, let's see, request or response I don't know how we want to format that exactly. Lots of different ways we could do it, but basically we want to note somewhere that that's the response code. 404. And then the other thing is, do we want to, if it's successful, do we care about logging that out? My gut says no, because it was successful. You don't really care, but also if you're debugging, maybe it was successful and you didn't expect it to be, so maybe you want to see that in all cases. That would be my guess. It's probably the more responsible thing to do is to always log that with the debug option. So we'll leave that. May come back and play with the formatting on this a little bit, or give it a different title or something here. So I'm trying to think of something that's more searchable, that we can have as a thing. But also we have the active job notice delivery methods Twilio in the log tags at the beginning. So if you're looking for that first, then that's probably going to be where you'll find this in your logs. So that's probably fine. Now we're going to want to go to create an error here. Maybe we will say, let's actually see if this will give us errors and exceptions. Because we could probably raise an HTTP error, potentially. That could be a good option for us. So let's look and see errors and exceptions. Did you catch bad things? Oh, hold on. Someone's at our other house and set off our alarm. I think they're doing an inspection on our house because they are we're selling our old house, and we accepted an offer on it, and they are I think they tripped the alarm on her house on accident. I better double check and make sure that appointment was 9 in the morning today. Pretty sure it was. So, what a fun interruption. Yeah, 9 a.m. Wednesday. Alright, so that's probably fine. Okay, so if we can raise these exceptions automatically from the HTTPRB gem, that would be cool. But it's obviously not raising an exception when we 404 normally, so there must be something that we need to do to raise those exceptions. I see. Logging and instrumentation. Okay, well, this could be good. We could also just throw in the http.use in here. That could work. So we could do that instead of writing our own little logger thing there. That would be kind of nice. It's not gonna be our formatting, so that might be the main issue there. So that's another thing that we probably want to include in here, is that this is going to be Rails logger debug post to the URL, and we want to record that response. So one nice thing that they're doing, oh, hold on a second, there's my security company calling me, so I'll be right back. All right, I think we're back. So sorry for the interruption. It's kind of weird. I'm not home, so I can't go and like see if anyone's there. But our our appointment there was scheduled for 9, so fingers crossed it's not burglars. But anyways, let's continue on with the stream and cross our fingers. So yeah, I think rather than using HTTP logger, which we could totally use, if we turn that on all the time, though, for these requests, I think that would be a little bit annoying. So it's a little easier if we do the logging ourselves. So let's do that, and we'll be a little bit more configurable and customizable that way. So we have this post and the URL logged now. So let's try this one more time and see what it looks like in the logs here. Okay, so we got a post to the URL, which is also like extremely important. We may want to also, and this might be a little bit easier when we go and write our own post method inside the base. We can actually include the include basic auth params. So that's going to be something really important to include, because that is, you know, if it's hidden away as you log this, you're not going to know if your auth parameters are incorrect or whatever. You won't be able to see that. So that might be something we should include. It's also something you might want to sanitize, though, and so it may not be something we want to include, but it's something to consider. So I'm going to write a note there just to keep that in mind. Actually, Steve, what was it, 6 a.m. the other day? One of my neighbors across the street there sent us a video that some guy with like rebar in his hand walked up to my neighbor's porch, sat down, and then got up and left after like 5 minutes or something. So it looked like he was just looking out, because they have like an Amazon package box on their doorstep there, and so I think he was trying to break into that, but 6 a.m. is just really late at night. That's funny. Yeah, it was like daylight out, because they have their Ring doorbell, and it was like, you know, it was strange. Like, I don't know why you would do that at 6 a.m. But okie dokie. So, what we're expecting here is to raise an exception. So this argument error that we're raising right now, I believe, is showing up right here. So that's why we get a stack trace here, which is good. But we really want this to be a custom method, and so now that we've got our logging tested, we can just write a simple test for this. We insert raises and our exception. So that's simple enough, and we'll run this test again. Instead of the stack trace, we should get a passing test, and we do. So that's good. Cool. So let's go and go into our noticed.rb file. And inside here, so we already have a validation error, a noticed validation error, and we could do a noticed HTTP error or something like that. I don't know if we should capitalize all that. It looked kind of funny, but it looks kind of funny either way, if it's all capitalized or not. So, you know, like, I don't know if we should have a HTTP error, or we should do a more nuanced error like they've got here. Generic response error, request error, state error. And that's interesting. Like, what is the request error versus a response error? Is the response error from when it can't parse the response, or is it when, because I don't think it gives you a I'm guessing that is the case because I don't think HTTP gives you an error when we really want an error when the status was not successful. So something I've spent a ton of time doing is just reading the code for libraries that I'm using, which I don't think people do enough. But if you look through the code and you're looking for that error, just like search the code, poke around and see what you're looking at, and it's going to give you a really good idea of how things are. So, if we're looking for that response error to see where it's used and why, here's this redirector. You get too many redirects error, which is a response error. An endless redirect error is a too many redirects error. So I guess it's keeping track of that sort of thing. So it doesn't really seem like they're using that anywhere in here. So let's look up that request error. Because really, what would happen in our case is that we're doing a request error because we are passing invalid parameters. You're either passing in like an invalid phone number, invalid to, or a body, or you forgot your basic auth account SID and access token or auth token. So that would probably be more descriptive of what would happen here. But it's also nice to see what they're using it to raise for. So they're doing an HTTP request error. Invalid HTTP proxy. Okay. IO object must respond to size. So that is when you're making the request is really what they're using it for. So I don't know exactly. Maybe we do response unsuccessful and raise an error like that. That could be something we would do. What's a good name? You guys have any suggestions on names? This seems to be one of the things that is worth putting the most thought and time into, is just good naming of stuff. Because if you name it well, you'll be able to come back to this code and really understand it quickly. If you don't name it well, good luck. It's a pain, and you're just going to be confused. And that's kind of what I found in the other notifications gems. There's like, targets and just terminology that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me when I read through the readmes and things. So I tried to do my best to call it, notifications and delivery methods so that they were very descriptive. So I'm thinking response unsuccessful is probably what we'll want to go with here. And we'll raise that there, and we're expecting it to give us back a noticed response unsuccessful exception here. Now, we are inside of the noticed module here, so if we're lucky, this will find the correct noticed response unsuccessful. Hey, buddy. You want some snacks? You hungry? So this is what we really want to see raised. We can also explicitly say we want the parent level class, but by doing this without the colons at the beginning, it will look up the chain that it's defined in and try and find that. And I forget some of the nuances there, but the easiest way to test that is to just run our test. So let's go ahead and do that, and it succeeded. So what it's really doing is looking up the response unsuccessful class inside of the Twilio class, then inside of the delivery methods module, then inside of the noticed module, and because we defined it inside of that noticed module, it gives us back what we want. So that's good. So this is something that if we really want this to succeed every single time, then we could enforce this error all the time. We could also have this option for it. And I'm kind of torn on whether or not we should have that option every single time. Or on all of these, it kind of almost feels like these should always be successful, and you should be aware of that if it failed. Because really this should generate a notification to Honey Badger or Earbreak or whatever that you're using for handling errors. If you want to silence those, that is kind of the problem there. So maybe this is on by default and you could turn it off as an option. That could be nice. So if any of these HTTP requests fail, you could ignore failures. And maybe that's the better thing that we do. It's kind of ignore failure is false by default, and we look and see if that's defined and set to true. That could be way better as a naming thing. Sometimes the naming ends up being clearer if you just flip it. So we could here say if options ignore failure, this is always confusing when you get into the double negative. So if you don't want to ignore failure and the response is not success, then raise the response unsuccessful. And then, maybe we write a method here that's a helper method that probably fits better in base, so that we could convert this from the double negative of not ignore, and we can make a method named just in a positive way, because I like the exception or the option being named ignore failure is true when we have that on as default, where we will ignore it by default, or no. We want to raise an exception by default. So the option should be to turn it off rather than the opposite, I think. If that makes any sense. It's kind of confusing. So those little nuances make a big difference. I like the debug is true. Let's go and maybe spend a little bit of time going back to the delivery method post request here. And we will grab this and write that out here, and we'll also put this here. We'll change this around, so we can say post URL basic auth is account SID user account SID passes auth token, and our form is format. Okie dokie. So that kind of improves that a bit. We could also make this a keyword if we wanted. That would kind of keep it a little bit more consistent. Maybe, and then we could also say URL is that basic auth is an empty hash and form is nil and JSON is nil or something. Nah, let's leave that because it's easier with the options here. And you generally know that you're posting to a URL, so that seems fine to me. What are you doing, buddy? Snack break for the cat. Every morning he'll sit and bother you for several minutes until you give him a few treats. Come here. Come here. All right. So let's try running our test again and see if that works. Okay, so we haven't broken anything. That's good. The log should still have logged the request, but it doesn't seem to. Aha, so we have our options in here, and that is getting overridden by the options name here. So maybe we want args, and we want to name that args instead, because that was clobbering the options method that we have on the parent level, looks like. Oh, there we go. So there's our post. That was the wrong. Running all of the tests in that file, and that's getting to be a little confusing to see. So let's run line 21. That's the only one we want to see. And yeah, so we've got this options method that gives us the options that are defined on the notification for this delivery method. And that's available through this. And if we were to call our argument here, we're going to use that local variable of options rather than this one. And that would be what would be confusing it. So Marco said on line 33, I guess on line 33 in base, you were also fetching the wrong keys out of the basic auth hash. Yes, you are correct. So user and pass. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. Yep, because every little step of this is got to be more generic, and it's definitely real easy to forget some of those little things like that. Thanks for pointing that out. So let's run this one more time, take a look at our logs, and we are getting our noticed response unsuccessful error, so that's good. Getting the log up there. We'll probably want to include some data inside of our raise. So when we raise an exception, we want not just to raise that, but we want to have, the useful message in there. So potentially we could tell you the response code and the body that we received as the message, or we could also say just turn on debug is true if you want to see the request. That's not going to be the most useful though, just to tell you to turn on that other option, especially if it happens in production and you've never seen it before. So I don't really want to do that. What I would like to do is maybe a combination of the two of these, where we want to include the post URL and we want to have the response there. So maybe we need to include the response inside of the response unsuccessful. So that would probably be the most useful thing we could do, where we say pass in the response into the exception, and then we have access to it. So if we do that, that's going to be way, way easier to debug. And what am I looking for? We want to go to notice. We want to go here, say initialize response at response equals response, and adder reader response, so you can access that. Okie dokie. Should be the same. Should still pass. Perfect. And then we can improve our test by saying either we can improve the test or we can write a second test, which is probably what we should do. Let's do a rescue begin rescue noticed response unsuccessful. We'll store that in a variable, and we want to assert equal that this is a e.response is a an HTTP-RB response object. So we want, let's go into the gem lib HTTP. Yep, we want this to be a response. Let's see if that works. And this is line 27. Okay. What is our error here? Doesn't really say. Runtime error. Oh wait. Yeah, class name's already defined. Includes response in exception instance, something like that. Okie dokie, there we go. This works, and it kind of covers this test as well, because we're, requiring a response here, or this exception here, but it doesn't at the same time. So if this was to succeed, then we would never hit this assert, and we would have this test pass with 0 assertions, which would be bad. So really, while this test seems like it covers the same thing this one does, and you could maybe get rid of it, you don't want to do that, because that needs to make sure that assert raises does raise the response we're looking for. So another thing is we can look at this and see if there's access to get that exception, but I bet not. Unless that's the... Okay, it does return the exception. So maybe that could be a single test if you wanted it. Sometimes you can do stuff like that. So the way I figured that out, looking here, might have been a little confusing. So this is the definition of how this method works. And so sometimes, so returns the exception match so you can check the message attributes and so on. Sometimes you can find the answer you're looking for in the description, but not always. But it's always going to give you the right answer if you just read the code. So I actually just open the source code all the time for these methods, because Minitest is extremely simple and easy. So you can see here that you give it some exceptions, and then it does its own rescue block. It calls your block with the yield, and then if it rescues from the exceptions you gave it, so the asterisk takes the array, first of all, in the arguments, this takes all of the arguments you pass it, converts them into an array, and then this rescue asterisk exp does the opposite. It takes an array and passes them all to the rescue, just like you would write real Ruby code with multiple exceptions separated by commas. And then if it rescues from one of those classes you gave it, it says great, and we'll just return the instance of that exception for you. So then otherwise it will ignore some of the Minitest stuff if there was a signal exception or system exit, it says, let's re-raise that. And then rescue any other exceptions, and we'll say the test failed, and we'll tell it the reason why. And then if there was no exception raised, then it will flunk it and say nothing was raised. So that's how that works, and it's really, really simple. And you'd be kind of surprised just how simple it is. So we can actually go and just put these together into a single test. There's not a whole lot of reason to go and run all that code 2 times. And it's just useful for us to, like, we're already checking to see that it raised that exception. Let's just check in the same test and make sure that it includes the details we want. If it was a more complex thing, you might want to have 2 separate tests for it. But in this example, I want to keep it simple and put it all together, because this test is covering, the only 2 things that we care about with the exceptions being raised here. I know that some people stick to 1 assertion per test, which I don't totally agree with, and it definitely makes their test suites really slow, especially when you get into longer running tests, because you've got to basically rerun the same thing to pull that off. So I don't like doing that. If I can avoid it, I'd rather have my test suite run fast and just group a little bit of stuff together there. I don't remember if I did. Control TN. I thought I did. I have the Rails Vim plugin, but I've actually forgotten, or maybe, no, it's not Command T. Nearest Rails. What is that command? I don't even remember now. I need to start doing that in my Vim again. Test nearest. Test nearest? Yeah. Boom. Yep, I gotta get back into doing that. It saves a lot of time. So, okie dokie. So we're good with that. That will raise an exception. Of course, it only raises the exception when it's turned on. So that is going to be on by default. I'm still not sure if we want this ignore failure or not. My vimrc is outdated on GitHub. I set up a new laptop, and I haven't gone through and re-updated my Vim stuff. Previously, I was using Janus, which hasn't been updated in a long time, but it still works perfect because Vim rarely changes. And that was really, really good for quite a few years, like 8 years or something, that I've been using Vim. And that gave me kind of I was moving from like Sublime to Vim, and it gave me enough of the keyboard shortcuts and things that matched Sublime in Vim, so I didn't have to worry about, relearning everything, and that's been really nice. But now I'm trying to go through and just build my own Vim config from scratch, and there's a lot to it. So Janus is definitely what I would recommend, though, if you're getting into it. Okay, so we can make a quick change to Vonage and Slack to make a post request for those. It's going to be very straightforward. In fact, that's probably all we need to change. So one of the reasons that it's useful to have our base post method have the URL and then the arguments is that it almost exactly mirrors the interface for the HTTP RB library, which is awesome. So that is really useful for us because we don't have to make hardly any changes. We just say don't directly talk to HTTP, just use our helper method, and we're done. So that's pretty cool. That also allows us to go into the Vonage test, and we can say raises an error when HTTP request fails. Yeah, so this one we'll probably want to go and customize the Vonage stuff a bit, because we're going to need the API keys and things. So let's run our test, Rails test, Vonage. Okay, name error. And that's coming from basically the format stuff that's missing, and or the credentials that are missing, because we're not passing any of that in our test example here. So we can do credentials, Vonage, creds, API key, API secret, I'm gonna have our format option here, Vonage to Vonage or something. And this will be basically the same thing. Actually, we honestly don't need this if we are doing that, because the credentials are part of the format. So we have our params to, from, and we can just do anything we want in here. So maybe we'll just do something simple like that. Okie dokie. Name error again. Now, this stack trace is giving me mini test stuff that is not. Oh, that's the other thing. We want this to be our Vonage example, not our Twilio example. Oh, thanks, Alberto. You caught it before I did. Okie dokie. So nothing was raised here, but it should have. So we need to run. So we should be making our post request with that format. Should be calling the base method. We're not ignoring failure. And this could be one of those things that sometimes those APIs will return 200 errors every time, which is annoying. So let's do. Actually, it's probably handy for us to return the response here as a return value there. So we can say response equals that and then throw a by bug in there. Yeah, cool. So response is 200 OK. And that is not what we want. So if we do a 2S though, you'll see that we get the wrong thing, or we get an error. So this is, one of those strange examples, but that helps us make our response thing more flexible. So we can capture the response here. We can do our error handling inside of this, the Vonage class, because it's going to be a little bit strange. As you can tell, it is technically successful, but they're not using HTTP status codes correctly, as they're just giving us bad credentials here when they should have given us, an HTTP, unauthorized response or something. So, to the Vonage API. Yeah, Marco, it's pretty funny. Maybe they'll be improving that soon. Let's go to the SMS API. Go to developer. Where is it? Tools, Ruby. So this is one of the things I did on purpose. Was I did not use their libraries as dependencies because I don't want to deal with, upgrading my gem every single time that their gem changes or Slack or whatever. And the dependencies there just add a little bit more maintenance, and their API is probably not going to change. So we know if we can make an HTTP request to their service, it's going to stick around and be the same. So we only have to manage the HTTP library from now on, and it's way easier. We don't have to worry about initializing their library and so on. And sometimes initializing their gems may not be that great because they might have like a global API key, and you might want to change that and replace it. So I'd rather do this one single dependency. I even considered just using net HTTP directly, but it sucks to do that compared to how easy the HTTP RB gem is. So that's why we're using that. That's the one thing that I'm willing to have. The other thing is, like, most gems, ideally, we should all be using Faraday. Faraday is awesome. So basically, it's a wrapper around your HTTP clients, so you can use it to create your HTTP request, and then you can replace the backend. So you can tell it to use libcurl, or a tool, one of the other adapters, and that's super interesting. And then in theory, you can upgrade your backend library, and it applies to all your gems that make API requests. But as you have probably seen, if you ever use gems that use it, then not all of them upgrade to the latest version of Faraday and so on, and things just get a little bit confusing. So, yeah. So, just got a notification from this thread. The message helper. Yeah, so he doesn't have a message in there, so if he's trying to reference this stuff in there, that is not going to show up. That text won't. But if you use, and that's another, well, yeah, that's for the SMS, right? So, yeah, because the email stuff, sending it out to the engineer mailer, if you use the I18N stuff inside the mailer, it's just going to use your normal mailer things. So yeah, good note, James, on the message there. Okay. So back to this. We are looking for the responses, and this is not good docs. Where are the example responses? Uh-oh. Delivery receipts. That's not what we're looking for either. Oh boy. These docs need some work. Guides, maybe? We're trying to find in the guides the response examples. Like the, here we go, static troubleshooting. Check the return status field for specific error codes. It's more what we're looking for. Usually that's included in the example responses. Troubleshooting. An array of message objects, one for each message. Ugh. So is the presence of messages in the response, I guess, the status field tells you if the message so tells you if the message was successfully queued for sending. A status of 0 indicates success. So we need to just then check messages in the first item in messages for the status code being 0 or non-zero, I guess. Ooh, not my favorite. But it'll work. I don't know why they can't just have a HTTP status code, but oh well. So let's go and then say response.parse, I believe, will give us the parsed body. So we want to dig into messages. Or we really just need messages first. But okay, so is this always, if it always gives us this response, including when it's successful, then we can trust that there should be a messages response, and we should have at least one message. Because, yeah, I guess we could go through every single message in here, too, but I don't know that we don't really want to do that. Because we can grab the first one, and then we can get the status from that. And if it's non-zero, messages first status. Can you dig response.parse dig messages 0 and status, where you would use the square brackets on an array? So going between a hash and array and back to a hash, can dig do that? Holy crap, that is awesome. I've never done that before. Huh. Okie dokie, then we'll do that. That's fantastic. I'll have to do something on that. That is really cool. A little bit of duplicate there. So status equals that. I dig it. So is non-zero work on strings, or is it non_0? Yeah. 0.0 or 1. I'm pretty sure there's a method like non-zero from active support or something, but that doesn't work. Ruby non-zero method. Oh, is it's actually in Ruby itself. Return self if num is non-zero, nil otherwise. Okay. But it's not going to work on a string, right? Yeah, that's fine. We'll just do status is not equal to 0. Then we can raise response unsuccessful. This isn't going to be does positive work? Yeah. I don't know if it'll work on a string. That's the only thing. Because it's got to convert to a 0 or to a integer, and I didn't really want to convert to an integer. We can just check that the value matches, because I think that's the only successful. Anything non-zero is going to be a failure, so we just need to check that. Ugh, not my favorite, but it'll work. And then, yeah, this one's a little bit painful too, because we would need to also include this ignore failure option in there. If we wanted to. So if not ignore failure and status is not equal to 0, things are getting a little bit nastier to deal with this one. But it is what it is. So I figure just converting that status to an integer, I mean, it doesn't matter too much. It's just that if we do this to I or whatever there, then we could have a nil converted to an integer, and we don't want that to be 0, and you know, that would be kind of bad. So I think it's better if we don't do any casting for reliability's sake. So I think we'll do that. Yeah, it's not great. Don't love it. But yeah, okay. So we're back in business a bit. Now we've gone down a little bit of the rabbit hole, just because this API could be better done, unfortunately. But it is what it is. So we have the response in this helper method, which is going to be great. It's already cleaned up, you know, the Twilio example a ton. We're still going to log that response in the debug line. So that's good. Or we should be. Sends a post to Vonage. Let's double check, because it doesn't look like it is being logged though. Or no, we didn't, in our test, we didn't put debug as true, did we? Yeah. So debug is true. There we go. Cool. That's what we want. So we'll add a little bit of like internal docs or something like this. Probably want to go into the wiki, you know, and either we need to build out more docs on an actual website, or we just build, you know, a section in the wiki to better document this stuff. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. We can make this method private too. Probably won't hurt. Let's run the whole test suite, make sure we haven't broken anything else. Cool. Good. This warning, the called method perform is defined here. I'm kind of curious about that one. Using the last argument is keyword parameters. Wonder if it's because of my keyword params here. It probably is. We may want to go change that into a hash. But we can do that later. Now let's go back to Slack and try it out. We'll go through and we'll go to test delivery method Slack test. We'll add debug is true to Slack, and we'll change this so we don't forget again. The Slack example. Rails test, delivery methods, Slack test. Line 13. We'll watch our logs and see that we should get a Slack HTTP request. No method error, square brackets for no class. And that is because we need to do the same thing as always. We need to set the credentials or the Slack format stuff. Yeah, the URL in this case. URL will be Slack URL def Slack URL, and this will just be Slack webhook URL. See if we can find a not real example URL. Something like that. Yep. Okie dokie. Hey, buddy. What are you doing? You interrupting the stream? So Slack should at least give us an error back then. Okay. And we should see here that let's see. So this URL should be logged. Don't see it being logged here. Let's figure out what's going on there. So we want our base. Could get the response here and bug it, I guess. See if it's actually running that. Or no. What am I doing? Need to run line 17, not 13. So that succeeded, but it didn't hit our bug, which is, oh, that's true, because it wouldn't, because it would raise the exception first. Let's check our logs, make sure we get the exception. We get response 404, no team. That's good. That's what we want from Slack. Yeah, awesome. So this is pretty solid. It is giving us some actual, error messages back. We made some good progress on that. The thing is now our tests are actually making real HTTP requests, and while they fail, they're still making real HTTP requests. So we probably want to record the responses to those and use VCR or something to stop that. Marco, yeah, so we're actually really sending a request out, but I'm doing that on purpose right now because we want to check the response codes from those APIs and make sure that we handle them and raise an exception in our code correctly. In the real final version of this, we want to record and still make a real HTTP request to those services, but we can fake out that request with VCR, so we can record their responses for failures, and we can tweak them by hand and stuff if we need to, and that will help make our test suite run faster, because we don't need to really bother Slack or Vonage or Twilio with crappy HTTP requests that are intended to fail. So that's good. I would rather do that than mock out the post method with Mocha or something, because we could call that method, but what if that method's broken and it doesn't work? We don't really know if it's actually making a request correctly or not. So VCR will make it safest for us. And then in theory, we could actually put in real Twilio, real Slack, real API keys for those other services, and then we could really test those out and make sure that they worked in production, and we could record those with VCR too. So that's one of the things that, like, we don't have any tests that make sure correct things happen. Like, it's not really possible. We can do it. It's not very, like, I don't know that it's worthwhile for us to say, let's post to Slack, let's hit the Slack API and grab the last message and make sure that it's that same message we sent. I don't think we can't do that with SMS. Like, we can make sure that we get a response that's successful back from Twilio or Vonage. Slack would allow us to maybe grab the message out of there, but we want to make sure that we send a message that's a 200 response, or we get that back without any errors, and that's about as good as we can do. So I think the best thing would be to use VCR for testing these, so we can just record those responses and then have like our test here that make sure we raise the correct errors and kind of do as end-to-end as we possibly can with our tests, rather than mocking stuff out, because mocking and stubs and things are where you get into trouble, because you think you're testing more than you are, and you're really not testing the crucial part, which is actually making the HTTP request. And that's the whole reason that these delivery methods exist, is to send real requests. So we want to make sure that we can confirm that as best we can. So now that we have the post method, we could check that post was called. This was like just a placeholder test. This test wasn't really doing anything useful. I still don't know that doing the post here makes sense. I think we're going to just replace these tests for each of them with VCR tests, because they're not useful. Even this is not really useful. It's fine. I mean, if we assume that our post works, it's fine. We can do this for now, but I really think we'll just replace that with VCR. So the PageM has some setup for VCR in the test suite. So might grab that. We have a little bit of configuration here with WebMock, mini test, and VCR, and then we have that connected if you have if you don't have this environment variable set. So it's really easy for you to run against the real Stripe test environment, and the same for Braintree. So that's like really handy. And then you can put in your own, like I have my sandbox keys in the test suite. It shouldn't be. It should be in secrets, but it's simpler, or it was simpler to make this run at the beginning. I needed to remove those. But yeah, so same concept here. We can probably just take this and move that over. So yeah, hook into WebMock. May do that. It's almost 10, so I'll do that in another stream or something. But I think we've made good progress on these. So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap up here. I'm getting a phone call from my real estate agent, so hope you guys enjoyed the stream, and I will talk to you later.